Brilliant. Okay, so we are on. Von, thank you so much for coming on to this interview. Our audience is part of the Brand Builder Academy. They're freelancers, of course, graphic designers, creative professionals, and small design firms, people who are interested in taking their design business to the next level, even if they're freelancers on the path to building an agency, perhaps down the line. And I am sort of doing this because I've come on a similar path, from a freelance kind of situation all the way up to launching an agency and running an agency. So in fact, this is probably one of the first kind of interviews that I'm doing. I've been doing live calls, but I haven't brought on anyone so far, and you're the first, and I thought you would be the best to kick off things in this vein. So what I would like to do is just give a little bit of introduction about you, and then of course we will dig into the questions. So once again, thank you so much for coming on this interview, and let me get started with the introduction. Well, Von Glitschka is a designer, illustrator, and avid pursuer of all things creative. Von is the creative director of Glitschka Studios, a multidisciplinary design firm in the Pacific Northwest. The studio shines as a creative hired gun for ad agencies, design firms, and in-house corporate art departments all around the world. He is a popular speaker on the topics of design, creativity, branding, and marketing, and has written 6 books. Von leads a number of online graphic design courses, started first with Tut Plus, I think, and then lynda.com, which is now, of course, LinkedIn Learning on illustration, vector drawing, and a lot more topics. These courses are hugely popular and a must for aspiring illustrators and designers. Von spoken at South by Southwest, AIGA, AAF, How Design Live, Adobe MAX, TEDx, High Five, Creative South, Creative Works, Creative Pro, DUY Uruguay, Revolve, and Icon, the Illustration Conference, and many more. Von's talks are practical and humorous, narratives laced with relevant information, creative insights, and inspiring conclusions. Wow. Von, you are the one and only. And so that is the official kind of introduction. But could you please tell our audience a little bit more about Von the person? This could be, of course, where you are, live and work, your family, your hobbies, and so on.
A lot of people kind of have the wrong perception in that, yes, I run my own design studio with my daughter, Savannah. She joined a couple years ago when she graduated from school. Most of the work we do is in context of branding. It's usually on behalf of other agencies, and they can be smaller agencies, they can be bigger agencies. We're kind of like I tend to say like a hired creative gun. And so we work with them to solve whatever problem it is, or a lot of times, a lot of the work we do is exploratory, meaning we're being asked to provide design in the context of a branding project, but it's more in a capacity of kind of developing ideas so they can see the potential where they can go. And ultimately, a lot of those projects, they might not even use our work. And we usually have to wait until it is public before we can even show some of that on our own site. And some of the projects, some agencies are just a little weird. It's like they don't want to have other people know that they kind of tap somebody outside the realm of their own internal people. So sometimes we can't even show the work we do. I tend not to like those projects, so I try to write my agreements in such a way that it says it's okay once public to show it, but every now and then it's not. So, but we're not big at all. It's just me and my daughter. There's been a few times over the years where I've taken on a branding project, and it's a little larger capacity than what I can pull off on my own. And so I've brought in other designers who do branding. That's happened several times. One was for a Lifetime television branding project we worked on, and I brought in like 2 or 3 other people to work on it with me. And another time was a pitch we put together to rebrand. The company is called Redbubble. I think they're based out of Australia. Just to put that pitch together. So it just depends. But pretty much everything I'm working on now in the last few years has just been me and my daughter. So
Fantastic.
a lot of people tend to, like, somebody posted something on, it was Twitter last week, and they were saying, hey, showcase your studio, upload a few pictures. And I think it kind of shocks people when they see my studio, because it's like a glorified, it's not big. My old studio at where I previously used to live was pretty large, but now it's pretty small. But I don't mind it. It's cluttered with all kinds of stuff. With you go into any designer's office or work area, and you'll see little trinkets, and you can tell pretty quickly what they're into. So
True.
yeah, my office is no different.
So where do you record your courses and LinkedIn classes and things like that?
When I first started developing content for lynda.com, is about a year after lynda.com that investors came in, and then about 18 months after that LinkedIn bought them. So now they've kind of transitioned, and eventually lynda.com will go away, and it's just LinkedIn Learning. Exact same content, by the way. A lot of people, since we're speaking on branding, I'll just make a little commentary on that. Is many times when a company has to rebrand or they're changing their name, part of the rebranding effort is communicating that so it doesn't confuse the audience they're trying to reach. And in this respect, LinkedIn's done a horrible job. So many people don't realize that's even happening now, and it's been just not handled very well, because I'm always kind of fielding that question. But it started off as Lynda, then it became LinkedIn, and then LinkedIn is bought out by Microsoft. So a few things changed after that happened as well. But to begin with, most of the time, when I first started, I'd fly down to just south of Santa Barbara, California, to Carpinteria, a little surf town. That's where their headquarters is located at, and we'd shoot all the courses there. But over the last like 3 years or so, since that was always fun, but it's a little logistical nightmare at times when I have deadlines and this, and then I'm juggling developing a course or whatever.
Yeah.
And then having that amount of like open space in my schedule to actually fly somewhere and record was kind of getting a little tricky. So I basically, the same exact sound boost that they have at LinkedIn Learning, I contacted that vendor. They're called Whisper Rooms, and I bought their smallest. It looks like a TARDIS sitting in the middle of my studio here. So,
Right.
and it is weird when I put it in. I didn't really lose any space. It just replaced a chair I had there. But yeah, that's all I use it for, is to record my weekly series and most of the courses. Every now and then I feel like flying down to Carpinteria, especially in the winter, because it's always nice down there. It's always cold up here. So
Yeah.
it just depends, but most of the content I'm recording here in studio, just because it gives me the flexibility to kind of produce it on my own, and that's what I prefer.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I mean, the quality of the classes from ages ago, since lynda.com time, they've been fantastic. Your studio, the setup, the lighting, and the production value of those courses. So this begs the question, and I'm sure everyone is interested. How did you land lynda.com? And I mean, how did you get on to become an instructor on such a, and in fact, at one time, and if you go and check out some of the videos on YouTube, and if you read the comments there, they used to call you the lynda.com guy because you became synonymous. And for the graphic design world, your courses were what lynda.com was about.
Somebody's asked me this before, along with like, how did you end up starting to write books, that type of thing. And it literally goes back to, it's easy in hindsight to look back and kind of figure out why you're at where you're at. Not so easy at the time you can have a lot of ideas. I want to do this, and you kind of plan, but usually decisions come about along the way, and that is ultimately kind of the path of least resistance, I guess, that you tend to take. So if I kind of map it back to decisions I made previously, I got contacted by a local college and their design program, and they asked me if I'd come in and participate in kind of auditing their program and reviewing what they do, and then giving them any suggestions that I thought would help them prepare their students to work in the real world. And I really didn't want to do it. I didn't have a lot of time, but I decided, okay, I'll do that. I went in and not really wanting to. And then once I got there, I go, okay, this wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. I met a few people that I hadn't met before at that time locally, a couple other people in other agencies, and then got to know the chair of the program. And that's where it started. And it was like a year from that point, the chair of the program started following the newsletter that I would put out on a monthly basis. And about a year after that, she approached me and asked me if, I'd be a full-time teacher in their program. And I couldn't afford that much time. I said, no, I'd be willing to do something more in an adjunct capacity, but it'd have to be like a night class. And it was only one term of the year. So that's where it started. I did that for about, I believe it was 7 years. And just in the process of teaching, I'd never taught before. I didn't even know what a syllabus was when I started teaching. And I kind of realized, trying to figure out, okay, how do I teach? The first class I taught was digital illustration. They wanted me to teach logo design and iconography, but those had to be during the day, and I just couldn't do it. So what I did do is I contacted a friend of mine, Jeff Pollard, who designed Tiger Woods logo, and I recommended him, and he ended up teaching those classes. So me and Jeff got to kind of be cohorts for a while in that program. But that was a lot of fun, but trying to figure out for the students what would make it easier. And more engaging for them is I decided one day, well, I'm just going to bring in this project I'm working on for a client and just kind of walk them through the process and explain, you know, from the very beginning what the client gave me, how I took that information, you know, worked out a strategy, did my own research, and just the whole process about being handling a creative project from the very beginning all the way through development, execution, design to the final. And frankly, because I didn't really know, I just thought the regular type of teaching was boring, so I
Yeah.
figured maybe they'd like that. And then when I did that, it's like, seemed like all the students were paying attention
Oh
for
yeah.
the first time. And so I started wrapping them up in these little tutorials of sorts, but they're all based off of real world projects. And I just literally have a tripod by my workstation with a camera on it, and then I just shoot physical pictures and screen captures
Yeah.
based off of different points, write notes, and that's all it was. It wasn't a video or anything like
Yeah.
that. And decided and started sharing them on the How Design forum. So this is before social media, and then people seemed to like them. So I decided to see if the domain illustrationclass.com was available, and it was. So I bought it and started uploading them. Then a lot of people started downloading them, and that got the attention of well, How Design contacted me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in speaking at the How conference?" And
Wow.
so that's kind of how the speaking thing kind of started, was that way. And then it was at one of the How conferences that I did. It was in Austin, and I did a talk on basically just the I forget what the talk was on, but one of the publishers showed up to the talk, liked the talk. She asked if she could talk later that afternoon. So I met with her, and they were from New Writer, and they asked me if I'd be interested in basically putting a talk together about, you know, the creative process.
Yeah.
And I kind of resisted it for about a year. Her name was Nikki, and I just didn't want to do a book which was about like, okay, an illustrator, here's this tool. I didn't want to do a tool-oriented book. That
Yeah.
just wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I kept pushing back, saying no. And she finally said, "Well, what would it take for you to do a book?" And I go, "Well, it can't be a book that once they come up with a new edition of Illustrator, it's like there's no point to it. I don't want to do that. I don't even read those books, and I don't think they're very helpful to begin with."
True.
And so she said, "Well, tell me the book you want to do." And I kind of explained to her vector basic training. It's more about the process. And finally, we agreed on it, and we did that book. And that book came out, and um, I updated it. That book originally came out in I can't remember the year now. It's all blurring together. But I ended up writing the second edition about 5 years after the original book came out. It's amazing once you write a book and then you go through it and you read it and you critique everything. You're going, why did I say it that way? Or why did I? That's just dumb. And so that's where I think the whole point about writing is it's more about editing than it is writing, because editing really does make writing a whole lot better. But the interesting story now is fast forward to a couple of years ago, and Pearson came in and kind of laid off that whole new writer staff.
Mm-hmm.
And Nikki, my editor, lost her job, and The nice thing she did is she gave me all of the, like, I told her I didn't want to lay out the book. I'll just art direct whoever you assign it to. And that's what I did. Well, she is able to track down all the source files and gave them to me, just so if I ever want to update it or whatever, I have everything I need. So, but to kind of come full circle, she'd be, I always thought she'd be perfect for lynda.com, LinkedIn Learning, I mean. And I recommended her a year or so ago, but it didn't work out. And just recently, though, she was hired as a producer. So now I'll probably eventually at some point be working with her again on a project. So, but it all started, long story short, it all started with the decision that I didn't even want to do, but I decided to do it. And just one thing kind of led to another thing. And ultimately, what I'm doing now, that wasn't my first speaking gig, though. I never even wanted to speak. A friend of mine in Iowa, and it was just by hanging out on the How Design forum and fielding or responding to people's questions or posts. And a friend of mine from Iowa called me or emailed me and said, "Hey, would you be willing to speak in Iowa at the AdFed group?" And I'm like, "Speak on what?" Like, I go, "Well, it could be on anything you want." And I was just saying no. And she encouraged me to do it. So I decided to do it. That was back in 2004. And ever since then, it's like I've enjoyed, I really enjoy speaking now. It's fun. It's like, my content's a lot better than what it used to be. I just kind of winged it to begin with, but now I tend to have, you know, thematic talks about
Right.
certain specific topics and stuff. And I just spoke at Kansas State University last week. That was a lot of fun. A small, you know, they have about 50 people in their program, but uh, I enjoy it just because it's fun, hanging out with younger people who are excited about the industry still. They haven't become jaded by all the things you tend to run into in this industry.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's kind of energizing, but it is cool. That program kind of amazed me because like they had an 80-20, 80% were female designers, and there's only about 20% male in there. And so when I got home, I emailed the chair of the program and gave her like 7 names of really good female creatives I know that they could invite to speak there, because I think uh, they need to see that. There's our industry is kind of skewing female, in my opinion, and I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
think that's a bad thing at all. But it's amazing. There's some the best part about speaking, traveling, is just the people I've been able to meet. I have some close friends that I've known for like going on 15 years now, that once again, if I wouldn't have decided to go audit a program one day, I would have never met them. And they become some of my, they're going to be lifelong friends now. And that's the part I enjoy the most. So,
Wow, wow. So yeah, I watched your TED talk also from 2014, and the biggest thing that I see in terms of your journey, and I've been seeing you for quite a number of years, is of course your unique perspective in terms of designs. Your designs are unlike anything out there, and the patterns and the things and brand identities that you create. But I wanted to ask you, from a freelancer perspective, first, well, this is 2 parts. The first part is, what do you think of the current state of design in general, but specifically the identity, the branding aspect, in terms of the industry, in terms of companies, in terms of what's happening? That's the first part. And of course, I'll ask the second part once you're done with that. What do you think of that?
I think branding doesn't have as, how do I put it, long of a shelf life as it used to. Meaning I could rebrand a company, and it seems like maybe it'll go 10 years before somebody decides to rebrand it. You kind of look at Yahoo would be one of the most recent examples. It's kind of hit or miss for me when it comes to Pentagram's rebranding. Most of what they do, I'm not really all that excited about. I thought Yahoo was done really well. I didn't really like the previous rebranding Yahoo at all. It kind of looked dated immediately when it came out. So I think what they came up with now is more timeless. But that used to be the old kind of gold standard for a brand back in, think Saul Bass, Paul Rand days is timeless. The brand has to be timeless, but actually this would be a good example, the Fat Rabbit one. We did that for Lander Associates, and you know, when we work with an agency like that, I'm not doing any of the research or strategy. They've done that already. They've just hired me to execute on that specific context that they have, in this case, vegetarian food. So they're playing off a rabbit, and they wanted it to look, you know, kind of graffiti-ish of sorts. And so I just take those kind of cues and do a lot of exploration on what they could do. And this was what you see here ended up happening after about, I don't know, 25 different concepts that came before that. And
Wow.
I kind of just threw this together one night just to do another exploration, and it happened to hit the vision that they had in mind, and they went with it. So I thought it came out fine. But always in a project like that, there's iterations. All the work that the public usually never sees, there's always something else in there that at times I tend to like better. So on these type of projects, now if I'm working on my own clients, I never show them anything that I don't completely like. I don't give them the option of picking a direction that I wouldn't pick, because I'm not going to show them. I'm not going to give them that opportunity to make that decision. So I kind of only show the ones that I think that I'd be happy with, regardless of what direction they pick, I guess is what I'm saying. A good example of that type of project would be like Our Story. That was one of our own personal clients, or Crozet Coffee is another one. This was a fun one. He was a curator at the National History Museum in DC, going out on his own, creating his own touring company, basically on the history of the United States from a distinct African American point of view. And this was a lot of fun to work on. And it's a good example of trying to approach branding of a small business. Essentially, it's just him and his wife at this point, and kind of positioning them on the same aesthetic level that, you know, a national brand would do. So these are the type of projects I like working on the most with small business like that, is because I know once it launches, once they start doing all the marketing effort that a company needs to do to get started, if they have a great identity, they're going to see the benefit of that. And one of my best examples for that, if the OneStopPro that I worked on there, that was he had originally gone to 99 Designs, and the name of the owner is Dan Foss, and he had a company called DFH Mechanical. So Dan Fost, I'm not even sure what the extra letter was in his original name. That was part of the problem, is like it wasn't very memorable. It didn't say anything about what he did. And so a lot of the questions I asked up front, well, first thing I told him is go back to 99 Designs and ask for a refund, because they certainly didn't help him. And he did. He got a refund. And then he was really gun shy. I quoted the project, and then he came back the next day and canceled it because he was just really paranoid he was going to get burned again. So I made a deal with him. I said, look, if after I'm done, if you don't like anything, you don't have to pay me. But I'm pretty sure I can come up with something that's going to work well for you. And he was okay with that. It was no risk at that point. And we did it. Part of the thing I discovered when I was kind of asking them very specific questions that kind of require them to think in a different way about their own company and how they work and how people view them, is that people tended to refer to his company as a one-stop shop. And I like the term one-stop, but not shop. He's not a shop. And so that's when I just started doing name exploration and discovered that nobody owned OneStopPro.com, which just I could not believe that was the case. And so I called them immediately and I said, okay, this is going to be your new name, because this is franchise worthy. I can't believe nobody owns this, but OneStopPro.com, you need to secure it like right now. And he did. And part of the other thing I discovered in research is he kind of liked characters he'd see that companies use. So that's why one of the directions we gave him was the character you see here. And originally he wasn't wearing overalls. It was just like a polo shirt. And he's the one that requested overalls. So it's worked out really well for him. It launched in August of the year we did it for him. And by the end of that year, December, he had already doubled his annual revenue. And he had people who run other companies come up to him and say, they thought he had bought into a franchise. And so that was great. That's exactly kind of what I was headed for. If you go back up to the vehicle, I'll share one thing that I tend to do for small businesses like this is on the vehicle, he only had one truck at the time. And so I put the number 3 on there to make it look like he had a fleet of at least 3. And so every time we're going to be doing 2 more truck wraps for him here pretty soon. And whatever number I haven't used, I think I'm up to 12 now or something. So I just double check with what I did previously and we knock the number up just so that it looks like he has this big fleet of vehicles. And it's kind of what I call small business psyops. So his competitors will kind of freak out and think he's bigger than what he is. So
yeah, that's a smart move. That's a smart move. So this is very interesting. And you're right. I mean, that name and that domain, that should be worth a lot itself. So when he contracted you for the brand identity, but you came up with a name, now, is that something that you charge for, or is that just like a value added thing you did? How do you do that? Do you add a lot of value in projects? How do you do
that? When I quote a project, that's part of what I include in my quote when I itemize it. But I always put after it if needed, because sometimes their name's fine, so we really don't need to do that. But in this case, that's the first thing I addressed was their name. And I said, well, the first thing we need to do is we need to change your name. It's just not working. And he didn't initially really want to do that, but after I explained it, he realized that was an issue. But it's part of my upfront quote. And then once they agree to that and they agree to my a work agreement, and then we just start. And so if it starts with the name, that's the first thing we start on, is we focus on, I have them fill out a brief, follow it up with other questions. Then once I have that in hand and I understand how they view themselves, more importantly, what their audience kind of tells them about themselves, then that gives me a good ideas on where to go with the name. So last few years, we've done a lot of renaming along with the rebranding project. The other project on our site, Pace, that was another one where we rebranded. It's at the top left, I think, or nope, right. This in their small business, it was two guys who took over basically a retirement planning company from their father, who had run it for 25 years. But their name was just this acronym, and it was like a paragraph of type, and it was horribly designed. So all we did is, once again, I addressed their name, and they weren't opposed to it. They just weren't completely sure if they wanted to do that. But once I explained to them that this is going to make, they always like to hear when I usually stage it like this. I said, let's say you and your brother run this for another 25 years, and your sons decide they want to do what you do, and you want to sell it to them. This can be a lot more valuable. Or maybe there's a bigger company who sees what you're doing and they decide to approach you to buy you out. Your name's not going to mean anything to them. There's no essential equity that you've built into that name, because it's just an acronym for what you do. So it's pretty routine. But if you have a branded company, not only is your business and all your clientele valuable, it's like your brand itself will be part of that value. So you'll be able to sell it for more. And people who deal with finances and stuff, they tend to like those kind of arguments. But that was another fun one to work on. It's always fun to see. They're always a little bit surprised when people notice their logo, and they'll email me and say, I've never had this many people comment on my logo. And it's just because, they haven't had anything worth commenting on. There was a local lady who was in the small business group of mine. This goes back about 10 years now. But she ran a tropical fish store that I always thought the name of it was cool, but it was just your generic channel letter sign that just had no character, just like Helvetica or whatever. But it was called, and I always thought, I always wondered what was inside there, but I never stopped and went in. And then I met her in a small business group she joined that I was in, and I said, you got to let me rebrand you. And she'd been running her business for 14 years, wasn't completely sure she wanted to do that. And I just told her, I'll donate this to you, just because that's how sure I am about it. And the rebrand, it was called the Samurai Guppy was the name that we came up with. And I did this, fun. It's more cartoony than what I usually do on a logo, but this one, I thought the name itself was so novel of sorts that it lent itself to it. So we did a samurai. It was like a little fish, but like samurai, and did her business cards, styled it kind of looking almost Japanese aesthetic with the Samurai Guppy. And I remember her coming into a meeting one day for that small business group, and she said, in 14 years, she says, I've given out more business cards. People have taken more business cards off our rack in the past 4 months than they have in 14 years. And
That
I
whole
go,
identity does, yeah.
yeah, well, there you go. That's what I wanted to hear.
Mm.
And she people loved it. She's getting ready to do her sign, which I was looking forward to. It was about a year later. She's getting ready to redo her signage, and then the owner of the building decided he didn't want to renew her lease for whatever reason, and she ended up retiring. So
Mhm. Mhm.
that was unfortunate, but that was one of the best comments I've ever received on some kind of branding for a small business. It was fun.
Awesome, awesome. She could have sold the brand itself. I mean, I do remember, I might have seen that somewhere. And these days, I guess it's the brand, it's the IP, it's the asset that could be sold. So the value you add to projects is fantastic. Do you also offer something like strategy? Do you, if someone comes to you for identity, do you offer strategy or positioning or things like that?
Oh, yeah. We, for instance, on Sinister Distilling, and um, when that the company was Deluxe Brewing. Well, it's the same company. Sinister Distilling is their distilling aspect. Their craft brewery aspect is Deluxe Brewing. But her husband had just kind of gone through what do you call it? A brewmaster program or whatever, and she was a marketing director at another company, so she understood, what it takes to start a business, how to position it, how to figure out strategy. And so along the way, when I first met with them, it was just her and her husband. They pretty much had no budget, so this is right when craft brewery was just kind of kickstarting, and I really wanted to kind of get in on the ground floor of a business like this when they were starting, because most of the time um, I'm approached by small business after they've been around for a while and they have all their bad habits thoroughly entrenched. And it'd be nice to kind of start with the company from the ground up to help them do the right things the first time when they're doing it. And so when I started working with her, um, I I basically told her, I'm going to help you get up and running, and then once you can afford it, that's when I'm going to start charging you for work. And it was about uh, 3 or 4 years ago they got to the point where I invoice for all my projects I work on them with now. But I work with her to figure out the best way to kind of position themselves and working out marketing strategies. And it's nice because unlike some clients who don't completely understand marketing, is she does, because she comes from that background. So there's some small businesses I work with where they don't even think like that. So part of what I do is I kind of educate them of sorts to help them get up to speed. Um, then eventually they slowly understand what it takes. And um, when I work with large agencies, I don't do any of that type of thing. I'm more of like a hired gun for the creative aspect. But when it's small business, I'm kind of doing all those things. So um,
Interesting, interesting. So,
yeah.
so if I can ask now, a lot of the freelancers, the biggest question that people really have is, how do you sort of, get access to, or rather attract high value clients as opposed to, clients that don't really care about what branding or design really means, and they're looking for the cheapest kind of offer out there.
Yeah.
Do you also have that? Do you face that struggle, or how do you handle that?
Oh, yeah. I'm no different than anybody else. I have clients like that. I have some clients that I start working with that they're not your typical small business. One I worked on last year, it was an established Italian sorbet company based out of Chicago. Um, it's a small business. It'd be categorized as a small business, but it's one of those small businesses that they probably do millions of dollars worth of business every year because they have multiple stores. They're creating product, manufacturing it for larger companies who distribute it. And I rebranded them, and then I redesigned all their packaging for all their SKUs. And we're just getting ready to wrap everything up. And he had gone to one of these distributors and said, hey, look at our, can't wait to manufacture all that ice cream for you that we signed contracts on. But I just wanted to show you our new improved branding and packaging. And this distributor said, well, I like the old stuff better. And like the old stuff was just bad. And I said, and he's telling me the story, and I'm going, well, that's okay. It's like your company. No, he didn't want to change his packaging now because he had written a $200,000 deal to, manufacture all the sorbet. And I go, come again? And I'm going, but it's not their company, it's your company.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't want to upset him because he might not order from us again, was the type of thinking. I'm going, okay, well, just run enough packaging to cover the first order, then move on. It's like, but I'm like, so we work through all this whole project, and then it's like somebody puts the brakes on right at the end when it's getting ready to launch. And I'm going, okay, well, I have everything done. So, he signed a work agreement. I'm gonna wrap it up and invoice everything. And then he comes back and he didn't want to pay the whole invoice. And I'm going, you remember that work agreement you signed that itemized everything I'm going to do, and this is how much we agreed to, and you signed it and said, okay. I go, I did all those things, so you're still on the hook whether you decide to use it or not now. That's not my decision. It basically got to a point where he said to me, I'd rather pay my lawyer than pay you.
Oh.
And I'm like,
Oh.
okay. So I had to turn it over to collections, and they kind of hounded him for about 3 months, and he finally decided to pay, but with a caveat. He said, well, he got really petty. He goes, well, I'm not paying this $200 you have here. Like, out of the whole bill. I go, fine, I'll drop the $200. But my work agreement says if he doesn't pay the full amount, he can't use anything.
Yeah.
And I reminded him of that, dropped the $200, he paid it. But to this day, it's like he can't use anything because he still owes me $200 according to my.
So stupid. That is.
And if he, I know, it was so frustrating. And I'm going, really, dude? It's like, I spend all this time on this. It looks better. And just one sour apple kind of shipwrecked the whole project. So
Oh.
I deal with that. Not a lot, but
Yeah.
it's
No.
it's pretty
I've had
normal.
similar experiences, and especially that's why in the later part of last year and even now this year, we're trying to actually target existing businesses rather than startups. We used to be so heavy into startups, especially seed funded startups, and what we started realizing was that startups, yeah, they get their seed funding, they're all pumped up, they're getting their identity done, and then either the business proves to be not viable, the idea proves to be not viable, or they get VC funding or whatever, angel investors coming in and changing the whole dynamic and saying, no, this is not it. So And you're right. I mean, even with a work agreement or whatever, you still have this kind of nastiness where you do the work, and I don't think I mean, it happens in any other industry except ours. I mean, people don't go and, buy a car or something and they say, well, I'm not going to use it or whatever, you know, and
Exactly.
I don't want to pay for it. It's
Yeah.
so frustrating. So in terms of the price points and in terms of your pitching or proposals, how do you handle that? How do you um, what is your process in terms of, let's say someone sends an inquiry through your website or whatever, they reach out to you. Could you just share with us, with our audience, what your process is like?
Well, if somebody contacts me, there's a business in town. He just contacted me last week. They're looking to open up another kind of restaurant, and it was a great concept. He actually came up with a cool name and everything. And so when it's a company like that, or a small business, and they're starting a new business, or they want to change their logo, they don't like it, whatever. Um, I used to just craft a response every time that happened, and I'm going, this is really, why recreate the wheel every time? So I have a general response letter that I reply back with on those kind of requests, um, and it has itemized deliverables. It has links to samples. It explains our philosophy on how we approach a project like this and what they can expect, and kind of walks through it in a simplified way of how it's going to work if they decide to go with us. And I itemize deliverables and give a quote. Now, it depends on who the person is contacting me. If because I do some research before I throw any numbers out. I remember I was contacted, maybe 5 years ago, and it was the art director for a company called Big Ass, and had, for some reason, that name struck in my head. And then I realized I had watched an American Chopper episode, and they did one of their custom choppers for a
Yeah.
company called Big Ass, and I'm going, okay, they have some money to throw away if they're doing these $60,000 choppers or whatever. And so I did a little more research, and I found out that previous year they were considered the fastest growing company in the United States. I go, okay, well, I don't need to charge them a small business rate. We can bump that up a little bit. And so I tend to do that kind of research as much as I can. And then I'll adjust my pricing. But usually my deliverables and everything in a branding context are, I kind of have that structured in the same way that I do for a small business, because it doesn't matter if it's an art director inside a company. If you make it simple for them, that it makes it easier for them to say yes. That's the way I look at it. And so I'll just adjust some of the deliverables or the costing based off of the size of the company, or what there's small business. They don't always need vehicle graphics. They might not need name exploration, or coming up with a brand story for who they are and what they do. So it just depends, but the structure of what I provide information wise tends to be identical. I just pick and choose what to edit out or add to based off of who they are.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So, I mean, a lot of freelancers and small design firm owners, the biggest challenge, I suppose, is really pricing. They 9 times out of 10, people underprice, and it's a, like, I did one live call a couple of weeks ago about imposter syndrome and how I think we sabotage our chances of um, you know getting bigger tickets on projects. So what is your view on that, and advice for freelancers when they're pricing something, or when an inquiry comes in and they're not able to research it because they use a Gmail address or something like that, and it's completely clueless. And although the project might seem interesting, they're saying, well, we're going to be starting a men's fashion outlet, and we're going to be doing leather accessories. But then you try to check out their name or something, and nothing. So do I price them low? Because the freelancers are desperate for whatever kind of project that comes in, and including myself. I used to do that years ago, and I was desperate for any project. So what advice, or what's your insight into that process about pricing and getting a bigger ticket?
Well, I have people that'll email me like that. So if I can't figure out who they are, some of the initial questions I ask immediately before I even provide a quote is I tell them I need like, and I'll itemize like 3 or 4 points of information that I need before I can provide a quote. I need to know who their name is, what they're going to be doing, if they have any existing URL or identity in place already. And it sounds reasonable, but for many of the reasons you stated is why I asked for that. It's because I don't want to be shooting in the dark. If I know it, once they provide that and I realize, okay, these guys are it's just somebody with an idea, they're not really an established business, then I consider that a small business, and I kind of know how to approach it price wise. I always have the opinion if there's no challenge for them to say yes, or if it's not a little painful for them price wise, then you're not charging enough. And yes, you run the risk of them going, well, I really can't afford that. And, that happens quite a bit for me as well. But I know that it's better than taking on a project that's, you're going to invest way more time than what you're going to be paid for. So I have a good idea of how long a project takes me for specific types of projects. So I always quote flat rates. That said, on my quote, I have a part that says if things go outside of the scope of the defined project as provided in this quote, then that's when I'll charge for any of that work on an hourly basis with this hourly fee. So that tends to kind of keep them in line too. But sometimes they want something else and they know they're going to be paying more because of that. So that's why I kind of enjoy working for agencies. I don't have to do all this finagling and haggling. They usually come to me and say, hey, we have this budget. This is what they need. I'm not dealing with any of the extraneous strategy or anything. It's just creative execution. And it allows me to zone out on an audiobook and work on something. I like that kind of work, but when it's a small to medium-sized business, then I tend to try to get as much information as I could in order to, give them a realistic budget. But, there's been times where I think designers can relate to horror stories and just unrealistic expectation stories. Here's one: is a city in Southern Oregon. They had a high school that had a branded mascot. It wasn't just used for their high school. It's basically the whole city kind of adopted it as their character. Well, it's one of those mascots that, was pretty, in the context of today's environment, isn't very sensitive, I guess you'd say. And they decided, and it was an Indian character, so they wanted to update it. And they wanted it to become a stallion type of horse. And so I said, yeah, we could definitely do that. Showed them all these examples of other projects we worked on in that context, and gave them a quote. You know, this is a municipality. It's not like a small business owner. And I believe the quote was around 12,000, something like that. And showed them everything they would get for that. And they come back, well, that's a little higher than what the board wants to do. And I go, okay, how about this? I'll give you guys a deal. I'll just cut it in half, $6,000. That was still way too much for him. And I'm going, well, you know what? I can't really help you then. and then it was about 5 months later. I discovered it. It just popped into my feed somehow, somewhere. I'm going, wait a minute, why is that name? Oh, that's that town. I click on it. They had done a thoroughbred horse that, like the head of a horse, it was okay. It just kind of looked clip artish. But what do? They slap these Indian head feather things on it. And I'm going, what are you thinking? You know, the problem was this, and then you update it. Oh, let's just turn it into a horse and put Indian attire on it. I go, what do you? And of course, people had a problem with it. And it's like, you know, this your mess. I'm not part of it. So, but it just kind of bums me out at times. Or I'll see a local. Well, there's a local business here, and they do great work. It was a foster care kind of organization where they'd take troubled kids and runaways and find really good foster homes for them. And they had a name they didn't want to change. It was an acronym. So I just improved the brand mark for them and created these nice cards and everything. And then I'm driving to Starbucks one morning. This is like 3 years after the fact. And I see a sign, and no, that's right. The sign came later. I got an email from the same company. Hey, we have a new name and a new brand. And I'm like going, what? And I had donated all my services to them initially because they were a nonprofit. And I see what they did, and it's just atrocious. It's just, how do you had something nice here, and now you have this. And now every time I drive to Starbucks, it's on the sign that I see every day. And I'm like going, it just irritates me. It's like, it's almost like, okay, let's do a sign out on the main road Von goes down every day and just irritate him every day. So I get to stare at that. Okay, one more story. Here in downtown Salem, I live in Salem, Oregon, south of Portland, and they decided we need these banners that hang from the lights throughout downtown to encourage people to explore and shop downtown. A local agency who had them as a client hired me to create the graphics for these banners. So I mock up these fun, artistic banners and that reflect shopping and exploring downtown, and mock it up on these photos so it looks really nice. They go into the board, and the board comes back and goes, well, they're too creative. That was their feedback. I'm going, how? Wait, hold on. How's that a bad thing? They're too creative. What does that even mean? Nope, too creative. They decide they couldn't use them. And what they ended up with is, I don't know if you've ever seen those Dover books with turn of the century engraved art in it.
Yeah.
That's all they did, is they just took Dover art and like hodgepodged it together. And it's just, so every year at a certain time, those banners come out and get hung up downtown. And I'm always driving through, it just irritates me again, seeing these banners, just what they could be using, and they're using this. And it's like,
Bad. No,
so,
in terms of being too creative, I don't blame them because, and I wanted to come to that topic. I mean, your creative work is just out there, and I mean the kind of patterns. So I wanted to ask you in terms of inspiration for aspiring designers. Now I know, of course, it has to be intuitive. It comes from within and all that. I'm a creative myself, but what is the secret of your particular creative kind of prowess? I mean, look at this, for example, the Nataraj. I mean, there's tons and tons. I could go on tons. So, what is your design philosophy? What is the secret of this kind of um, that the next level kind of multiverse kind of design creative skill set?
I always have to have something going on the side. It's like client work is great, but this was something that I did after. This goes back in July. I went to New Delhi, India, and basically Adobe's headquarters for the Illustrator team. Consulted with them on. I was one of 14 other creative people they brought over, and we basically audited what they were doing with their roadmap for development, and kind of told them how they should reorganize it and what to address that is actually better. And when I was there, I'd never been to India, so kind of experiencing that culture and looking at a lot of their art. When I came back, I just created this and sent it to Adobe as a kind of a thanks for inviting me type of thing.
Beautiful, beautiful. So in terms of so you have, yeah, I remember the Abe Lincoln one. I don't know if it's here.
If you go up to products, it'll be under posters. So
Okay, products, and
it's, yeah, there he is.
yeah, this one here. Oh man, I mean, this is just. So tell me, what is the inspiration for this, and you know what
Well,
went on?
that the original like thumbnails, like a little colored sketch I did on an old iPad years ago, just off the top of my head, and it looked nothing. It didn't look as good as this did. It was just like a little color sketch, but I thought there was an idea there that I could capitalize on. So it was hanging in my studio for about 5 years until I decided to get around to exploring it further, and it kind of led to this artwork. And once again, it's just me experimenting. Wasn't really for anybody. And then I was speaking at a conference called Creative Pro, and so I just hit up a couple of vendors I knew, a paper company and a printer, and said, "Would you print these posters? I'll put your logo on it." And then I had them shipped to the conference, and then I just signed them and gave them away. So just kind of turned it into something like that. But I still have a small box of these too. So maybe here's what I'll do. If you you can pick two, so however you want to do it, just pick two people and I'll send them a poster.
Oh yeah, that would be fantastic. I think I know I can't put myself into the mix, but that would be something awesome on the wall. So thank you so much for that, Von. So your strategy of doing side projects, I think that is something that every designer should aspire to, and I've seen it over the years. You know, the way you on Twitter, for example, you sort of introduce or you post tweets and images of work that you're doing, which is not necessarily client work. So would you say that for aspiring designers who want to take their game to the next level, that they should always have a side project, not just for money, but just for the pure passion and to improve their skill set?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they should, people tend to think of inspiration that, well, I'm waiting for inspiration to hit. And I don't remember who said this quote originally, so I can't give proper attribution to it, but I've heard that inspiration is 99% perspiration, meaning you don't have to feel inspired to just start doing something. But if you do start doing something, um, you eventually are going to sustain that inspiration yourself. And I've really found that to be true. I mean, there's days I come to work and, I have deadlines. I have certain projects that are due on certain dates, and I can see that deadline kind of coming closer, and I don't feel like being creative that day. I just sometimes I start drawing out ideas or sketching out thumbnails, and nothing is clicking. Nothing seems to be happening. I did a whole talk based off um, uh, of getting to a point in your process, in your workflow, where you just feel like um, your creative tank is empty. And so how do you get around that? How do you execute creative work and specifically generate ideas when it's hard to even be motivated to do it? And I really think the key to that talk is all about pursuing creativity outside the context of work, because you do that, you open up new possibilities to explore different types of styles, or different types of projects, or build new skill sets that a workflow for a client might not ever afford you. So and that's the best way to kind of grow and improve yourself. And if you do it on your own, nobody else has to know. Let's say you decide, well, I'm going to try uh, doing this kind of illustration style. I've never done it before. Well, if you start doing that and you don't like it, that's okay. That's, there's more work created in our industry that is bad and nobody ever sees, than there is good stuff that gets all the accolades anyway. I mean, the creative process isn't about, figuring out one idea and that's the best idea. It's about coming up with all kinds of things and knowing that some of them are ludicrous and inappropriate and just aren't that great, or they're marginal, or it's low-hanging fruit that anybody could think up in a certain context. And it's kind of working through all the bad, because that's what leads to the good idea. That's what leads to, you know, those kind of ideas that somebody will look at and go, wow, why didn't I think of that? I see that kind of work all the time, where I see a design, I'm like, yeah, that's like, that was, you could literally look at some work and say, that is the right solution for that. Like, I mean, I can't think of any other way that could have been handled better. Um, so that's, we all try to strive for that. And a lot of times, depending on timelines, if you work inside a company, how successful you are at it is based off of how truncated the timeline is that you've been given to work with. So you do the best you can. Um, it used to bug me when I first started working on my own. I never thought about it when I worked for other people, but when I worked on my own, is like, why is it hard to come up with a good idea? And in the process of putting together a talk I originally did at the How conference, um, I started thinking there has to be somebody that's researched, like creativity and idea generation, and from a scientific point of view. And when I started trying to find anything that would talk on that subject matter, that's when I discovered that they categorize brainwave patterns, thought, into 5 distinct brainwaves. And the one that is directly tied to idea formation, creativity, is gamma level of thinking. And it's a higher mental activity in terms of the hertz, you know, the electrical impulses that are kind of sent out between the synapses in your brain. Um, it's actually at a higher level. So our normal consciousness is here, and to formulate ideas, you have to get it up to here. This is why things like brainstorming is a good method to do that, because the more people you have addressing one central issue, somebody will say something, it'll make somebody else think something, and somebody else will go, oh, what about this? And they pop into that higher level, and those are the eureka moments you have. It's not sustainable, though. It's not something you can walk around all day in gamma mode or whatever.
You're gonna burn out.
Yeah. So the talk that the one talk I've given the most would be that talk, and it's all about the things you can do outside the context of work. I show examples of people doing it in different disciplines, some creative, some aren't. And because frankly, creativity, that kind of level thinking can be used to solve any kind of problem, not just a graphic or a design related problem. It can be any type of problem. But it was kind of cool when I discovered that, because I go, oh, well, that totally makes sense now. I now understand why it's hard to come up with ideas, and fear plays a big part in that. So it's all about recognizing if you're struggling with coming up an idea, that's good. If something comes to you too easily and you're not bothering to think about it anymore, I would argue you're not trying hard enough. There should be a struggle there. And if you struggle and you're right at the point where you're like, I've racked my brain, I can't come up with any ideas, nothing's gelling, that's usually pretty much at the moment you need to just stick with it, because you're at the point where you'll either break through and come up with some ideas, and then it'll start kind of flooding in, or if you step away at that moment, not giving up, but just saying, I'm going to focus on something else, your brain will still process that. And so you might be taking a shower or driving the car, and then an idea hits you. That's usually the way it works. So
Wow.
It would be nice if you could just go, okay, click into gamma level thinking. Let's start doing some thumbnails, but it doesn't work that way.
Wow, that is so interesting, and I love that. And the idea that at the bottom of that, the silo is where the ideas might come out. It's almost like ketosis, isn't it? Where your body runs out of the fat and then starts eating into the fat that you already have. So it's a similar principle. But you're right. I mean, it's hard to walk around and have a switch. But as you said, one of the things that you always say from years and years is always draw. Any talk you gave, any interview, you always say, keep drawing. You keep drawing every single day, and eventually your skill set is going to go up. Now, the biggest thing that a lot of freelancers, or maybe it's how the world is, and you got to pay your bills and all, but people are only willing to do creative work when they're getting paid, and in between that, and when they're not getting paid, they don't want to do any other work, which is, I understand. I mean, but similar to you, I when I was down and then coming back up again, I was doing a lot of work just for the sake of it, because I knew that you had to hone your skills, and your skill set, of course, has been tremendous for the past number of years. And one of the things, a story just came to my mind about your creativity, and I want to talk about that. It's this story. I mean, look, on Twitter, right? There's so many instances of this happening. People ripping off your designs, but one of the best ones was this Korean company. they ripped off your design, and then they said, okay, fine, we'll pay you for the copyright, and then something. So first of all, tell us a little bit about that story, but also, if you
Yeah.
can, but also how you have this every single day, people ripping off your designs. And so what is your advice for designers, and how do you combat that? So if you can, please.
Copyright infringement, there's nobody, I don't know any designer that can afford to register every copyright on everything they create. That's a little impractical. So, and the thing is, they really don't need to. They can actually wait until there is a problem, and then knowing that they need to enforce a copyright they know they own, and all a copyright is if you created it, then by default you own the copyright. Whether or not you ever register it with the federal government or not, in the states that is, you own the copyright. It's a constitutional right, part of the original Constitution. When it comes to copyright for myself, I tend to only copyright stuff before I ever find out about an infringement. If I know that the theme, I've dealt with it so much over the years that I kind of know up front if something's going to be alluring to somebody who would do that, so I'll tend to copyright it. But most of the time now, it's usually in response to an infringement, where I'll then take the art, copyright it, and then respond to them with the certificate in hand. That's all it is. All a certificate, by the way, for the federal government does is it gives you a confirmation that the government agrees you're the original, it's your original creative expression, therefore you own the copyright. And so if somebody decides to take your work, or a company takes your work and uses it, and that was the context in South Korea, is you can respond to it. Doesn't matter if it's outside the States. Every country has their form of copyright. Some are easier to deal with, some not. But usually the way it happens for me is I get an email and it said, hey, from South Korea, this came from. Somebody there recognized my art, and it was on these soda cans. I don't remember the name of the soda off the top of my head. And I said, can you turn it around to where it shows the info on who that company is? And I'll follow up on this and see what's going on. And they did. And so I would have never known about it. I've never been to South Korea, but somebody there recognized it as my tribal lion motif. And so it was. So I usually set up a PDF file that shows a comparison. It includes my certificate of copyright, which has the date of when I created it, so they know it predates their use. And I said, and I included the invoice. I said, look, I'll make this easy for you. As long as you pay this invoice, then I'll consider it like you contacted me. Can we use it on this packaging? And you can continue to use it. But I told them, just know that I'm going to retain the copyright on the artwork. This just gives you it's a usage fee of sorts. And sent it off. Well, it turns out that this beverage company had hired a local agency in South Korea, and so they carbon copy me and email it to that agency saying, hey, this is your problem. You did this for us, and you said you came up with this, but you guys just took the art, so you need to deal with this and pay this invoice, otherwise we're going to find a new agency. And so they put the heat on their agency. That agency contacted me. I explained the same thing I do for them. So they paid it. And we're not talking, it wasn't a ton of money. I wasn't trying to gouge these guys. They paid it. And then it was about a year later, they come back and they say, we really want to own the copyright on this. And I said, well, how about this? Because it's a hassle to go through, like, I don't even know what they call it really, but I believe it's like canceling your copyright ownership officially. It's just a pain. I didn't want to go through that. And so I said, how about this? I'm going to retain copyright in the States. I don't think you guys have any plans of marketing over here, but I'll grant you, you can get it copyrighted in South Korea. Or I think all the copyrights in that area come out of, can't remember the country. It's actually not, it's like a Asian copyright situation over there. So I think it comes out of Indonesia or something like that. And they said, okay, we'll do that. I just charged them the same amount again. They paid it. And then about 4 months later, I get an email and it says, hey, we went to copyright this, and it's Singapore. That's where they go through the copyright. We went to copyright this, and we got notified that we discovered that somebody else had already copyrighted it. And so what it was another company in Singapore actually had taken my same artwork and copyrighted it themselves before this other company did. So they came back, this agency that works with the beverage company comes back and goes, well, we can't copyright it now. And I go, well, that's not really my fault. Remember, you stole it to begin with. But I told them, here's what I'll do. I'll contact, because I saw the law firm that filed the copyright on behalf of whoever it was for. I still don't know who the entity or business is that's using it or how they're using it. I have no idea. So I could go to Singapore and it might be on a big building, who knows? But I sent them a letter and said, hey, I'm the original creator of this artwork. Here's my copyright. It predates yours by 5 or 6 years. It's like, so could you whatever, to remove your copyright status or whatever. Basically, I got a legal letter back from this agency saying, go pound sand, we don't care what you think. And ridiculous. I contact my copyright lawyer who's in Portland. By the way, unlike most lawyers, you go in their office, those legal books, everything's oak and burgundy. You go into Cole, that's his name, his office up in Portland, and it looks like a curiosity shop with all these little strange knickknacks and artwork everywhere. Because he's an IP lawyer, so he deals with artists all the time. So it's kind of cool. But I sent him all the information on this, and he just started laughing. He thought it was funny. He's going, well, if you were Apple or Google, yeah, you could go after this and win, but they know you're not Apple or Google, so they're just going to string you out because they know they can last longer than you could, and you'll never, it'll cost you more than what it's even worth. And he's right. And so I basically couldn't do anything. So yeah, that was interesting. That same artwork, though, about a year or two later, a friend of mine who lives in London, so if you ever go back to London, you could track it down. He was walking through a neighborhood going home, and it was like a gated condo. And there's my logo, like about 6 feet wide and tall, up on the side of the building. And it was the same lion. And they even had it molded into the iron gates for the community. And he starts taking all these pictures. And once again, over there, they're barristers, not lawyers, something like that. And had a friend of mine who runs a company over there let me talk to his lawyer about it to see what they could do. And long story short, it would take me, well, I tracked down the developer. He had sold it to a lawyer, so the lawyer owned the property now. And so I decided well, I could hire a barrister, write a letter, send it to this lawyer, and deal with it that way. But when I talked to the barrister, it was going to cost me about £1,300 just to draft a letter. And I'm going,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can't afford to do that.
Yeah.
So,
In London, it is very expensive. Yeah.
yeah. So, but some things have been really easy to deal with. And I found if you can talk to the lawyer of a company who's infringing you and you show them your certificate, especially in the States, but I've also done it in Australia, and it's reasonable, they're all about telling the company they represent, just pay it, just get it over with. My daughter came into my office, this goes back about 4 years now or so. She comes into my office one day and she goes, I was playing Assassin's Creed and the character, can't remember the character's name in the game, he has your artwork tattooed on his forearm. And I'm going,
Wow.
what? I go, no. And she goes, yeah. And she like pushed me over and jumps on my computer and pulls up these images on the internet that are screen captures of the game. And sure enough, on his forearm is a tribal face that I designed, that whoever the developer was at Ubisoft that
Yeah.
worked on the character.
Ubisoft, they need to pay that.
Yeah, he's tattooed with my art. So I did more research, found images, put together a PDF with showing comparisons. I had that copyrighted, sent the certificate. Well, I called Ubisoft and I said, can I have the contact for your in-house legal counsel? I didn't know if they even had one. And they actually patched me through to somebody, and I was able to get an email address, sent him all the information. About a week later, he was on vacation at the time. A week later, I get an email back. He's saying, I've looked over all your information that you sent me. Yeah, I'm not sure how this happened, but we'll go ahead and cut you a check and take care of it. Once again, I wasn't gouging him. I just said, look, if you called me and said we want to use it in the game, this is how much I would have charged. They pay me. And then I was out of town speaking. I get home, my wife said, Ubisoft paid you again. I go, what are you talking about? Well, I go, they already paid. They go, well, they sent another check. I go, well, they didn't owe me anything. You didn't deposit. Well, yeah. And I'm like, oh, great. And so I contact the lawyer and I go, for some reason, you guys sent me another check and I was out of town. My wife cashed it. So how should I get this back to you? And the lawyer just goes, just keep it.
Wow.
and I'm going, okay, you can do it again if you want to. You know?
Yeah. Make more tattoos.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, no, I mean, copyright infringement is a big issue. Not only people ripping off, but also inadvertently, especially in agency, like, bigger agencies or even design firms, where our designers, they might not really copy anything, or they might not, but something similar might exist all out there.
Yeah.
And it becomes a bit of a liability. And so that's something, yeah, designers need to be really careful about.
Yeah, well, copyrights, there's companies like Google, Amazon to a little lesser degree, they're trying to lobby and change copyright laws, specifically what's called the orphan clause of copyright, meaning they want it to be that they can use any image they want. All they have to do is try, put that in air quotes, to locate the original creator to get permission. And all that means is, let's say they find some old email related to some artwork and they email something to them and they never hear back. Well, we tried. And so they can use the artwork, and then even after the fact, if the artist isn't dead or whatever and comes back and says, hey, that's my artwork, you use it on this campaign or however they're using it, there's no way for him to get reimbursed for it. Well, we tried, we emailed you. Well, that email is like 10 years old, I don't use it. Well, that's not our fault, we tried. And literally, that's what Google's trying to do. They've been trying to do that for over a decade now. And there's, can't remember off the top of my head the name of the nonprofit that keeps kind of fighting on them on behalf of illustrators specifically is where it started. But they are. But the other thing about, there's something else I wanted to, I haven't had coffee this morning, so I'm trying to pull this from thin air. There's something else about copyright that I wanted to state. Now I can't remember. I lost my train of thought. So if it pops in, I'll tell you.
Beautiful, beautiful. One thing that I wanted to really talk about is on Twitter, you take Adobe to task. I mean, there are bugs and glitches. You are a champion for designers because you're the only one who calls, well, you're one of the very, very few, I would say, who calls out the kind of bugs and all that. So could you tell us about that and, you know, how that happens?
Yeah. I didn't set out to do that. That was never something that was a strategy or anything like that. It's like I used freehand for 15 years before I ever moved to Illustrator. And I only moved to Illustrator because they bought freehand and killed it. And it's just the fact that from the day one, from using, like I can literally count on probably one hand how many times freehand ever just crashed on me. There was some bugs every now and then, but nothing as debilitating as what I've ran into AI from the very beginning. And so as I started using Illustrator, I just thought, okay, at some point this is going to get easier because I'm just not familiar with it. And well, that I never reached that level. It's like I still get frustrated with Illustrator, and I've been using it longer than freehand now, 17 years. And so, yeah, I tend to call out stuff. There's still a snapping bug in Illustrator. And one of the reasons they invited me over to New Delhi back in July was because I have been on top of all this stuff for many years and talking to their engineers and consulting with them on features such as the pattern tool was one of the features I consulted with them on. But yeah, I used to know the marketing director for Illustrator. We actually became friends, and he would get frustrated with me. And like I remember one time on Facebook, I was frustrated about something in Illustrator, and I said, "These engineers are a bunch of noodlers." And the marketing director emailed me and said, could you not call our engineers noodlers? They're kind of sensitive. And I'm going, okay, fine. I'm going, you know, but it's like, so the interesting thing about that is, yeah, I point out stuff, and if I would have never started commenting on Illustrator like that, I would have never been invited to New Delhi. And so when I was over there, I actually, and I've only told a couple other people this, so this is kind of fully disclosing it now, which is fine. I didn't sign anything that says I couldn't. But when I was over there, I approached the head of the AI team and told him, I want to help you guys. I want Illustrator to be the best vector drawing program there is, but there's a lot of things that need to improve on it. And I put forward this offer. I said, I'll close down my business and I'll work with you guys directly for 4 years just to improve Illustrator. If we can't do it in 4 years, it's never going to happen. They haven't taken me up on that. And
Wow.
the kind of reply I got back was, well, I think the corporate might have some problems with some of the things you've said on social media. And I go, and I'm going, but isn't that why I'm here? I mean, I'm giving you honest feedback, might be a little sarcastic at times, but it's certainly not untrue. And I go, and when I was there, I've been talking about the snapping bug for going on 5 years now. I mean, it's unexcusable. It's a vector drawing program. If they don't have snapping locked in, that's like, well, the brakes on your car work most of the time. Well, that's unacceptable. It should always work. It just, so the same kind of parallel when it comes to vector building. And so when I was there, I brought up that issue again, snapping, and they're still acting like, well, we're not completely sure if that's, I had them try it and I had them keep trying it. And finally, when I was there, they saw what was happening. And so for the first time in 5 years, they actually spent enough time to demonstrate that, okay, there is a snapping issue. We're not sure why that's happening. And the engineer came back to me the next day and said, I think we're going to have to completely rewrite the code on snapping to resolve this.
Wow.
Okay, we'll do it. You know, it's like another bug I pointed out. The very next day, the engineer comes in and goes, I got rid of that bug. I go, what? He's going, yeah, it'll be an upcoming build. It's so when you would use a scatter brush in Illustrator, if you expanded it and you go to keyline view, you'd see all these no fill, no stroke bounding boxes on every iteration of the brush. And they're annoying. I'm going, why? Why do we have these? Why do you need these? Isn't it smart enough to know that nobody would want those? Because if you expand and then unite, it just screws everything up. And they agreed, and one of the engineers fixed it overnight. So now that's no longer a problem. But it's like not everything can be fixed that easy.
No, I know, but I think they should have taken advantage of your dedication to trying to make that software perfect for the design world, and they should have brought you in as a consultant, to be honest, because you're right. Some of the things that you pointed out, they're still there. It's still in one form or another, even in the latest versions. You know.
I consult with them, but I mean, what they really need is somebody on a daily basis who's looking at features and improvements and saying, okay, because it's all coming from the point of view of engineers who don't use the software to create on a daily basis. Their beta software testing never catches any of these things because it's engineers saying, here is this new tool, new feature, check it out and let us know what you think. Well, like for instance, one of their newer features is the freeform gradient tool. And like the first time I decided, well, I'm going to do a DVG lab and just showcase how I'd use that. I understood in principle what it did, but I hadn't tried it yet. It was a tribal face design I created, and I was just going to make a psychedelic looking thing with all these colors flowing through it, only to discover that it doesn't work on compound shapes. So let's say you have, what would be a good example? Let's say you have a tree, the trunk, and all the leaves are just free floating around the branches. They're not fused to it, but it's a compound path, meaning if I just drop a color anywhere, the whole thing changes.
Yeah.
Well, if I decided to make it free flowing color throughout it, there's some pieces that color won't flow through. There's a bug. And I'm going, are you kidding me? This can't be, I'm doing something wrong here. Nope, come to find out that it won't work on compound paths. And I go, I would have found that in real world beta testing. Real world meaning I'm using beta software to do my day-to-day job, and I'd run into all these problems in the normal course of work, but they don't have beta testing like that. They don't have anybody that does that. And I keep telling them, you need to hire, like pick 5 people, 5 different disciplines who use Illustrator. Maybe it's a type designer's one, maybe an illustrator's another one, a logo designer, some different disciplines, and then say for every given development period, usually it goes about 8 or 9 months, we're going to pay you a flat rate of like, I don't know, $10,000, $12,000, or maybe $1,000 a month, and that covers any problems you have. So maybe something crashes and you lose art, or you can't get your project done as fast as you want. It covers your expense to deal with that. But you you set it up so it will report everything that you run into, and you keep notes or whatever. And then that way they would have all of these bugs that people only find once something's released to the public, and they could address it before it's ever released to the public. But it's like, I remember telling this to some Adobe Acrobat engineers like about 7 years ago at Adobe MAX, and they're like looking at each other at the table going, that's actually a good idea. Like, that's just me thinking. I mean, you guys should be thinking this way. How is that not even on the table?
Yeah,
So
it's amazing. It's amazing.
I mean, the people behind the software are great. The engineers are great people, but I still don't completely know I don't think they're making all the calls. I think a lot of those things are being dictated to that team from higher above. From some of the things I heard, that makes a little sense. In which case, I think at some point they're being hamstrung. We were sent there to say, this is the roadmap of development you should be focusing on. This thing over here that you're working on, like in theory it might sound okay, but nobody's ever going to use that. It's like the type touch tool. I remember when that was a big, it's live text, but you can move the letters. I thought, well, I think I might be able to use that, only to discover it's just easier to convert to PAS and move it around myself. And it's like, because even if you type in a new word, it screws up all the
it does. It does. Yeah.
So it's like, it was good in theory, but in practicality, it was stupid. And I think the perspective tool is another one. That's more irritating than anything. You accidentally hit it, and then you can't find the icon to shut it off because it's usually hid behind a floating palette somewhere. Yeah. So anyway, I would love to I'd be willing to do that, but so far the offer hasn't been taken up. So
Excellent. Excellent. No, thank you for sharing that with us. Von, so finally, if I were to ask you, what would your advice be for a freelancer or a small design firm owner to really take their business to the next level, not only in terms of the kind of projects that they take up, the kind of clients they work with, the kind of prices they charge? What would be your kind of philosophy or advice to the freelancers?
I've always found the things that change, for me, it's always trying to learn things that I otherwise would, sounds a little contradictory, but I'd otherwise not want to learn. And I found every time I've stepped out and I've read a book on, let's say, marketing or business growth or things that it wouldn't be in my top 10 list of things to read, but I have read them because I keep hearing good things about them. And when I do, I'm like always kind of blown away by some of the insights I pick up from it, which gives me more information on how better to position myself within the industry to kind of get the attention that I need in order to land a project. And it used to be, frankly, it used to be easier to do that with certain methods before social media, where now social media allows you a global audience, but it allows everybody a global audience. So before social media, I could, for instance, publish a page in Workbook, which was like, just think a catalog of work. And I did that for about 7 years, but it got to the point where the economy tanked in 2008, I believe, and paying at the time $1,400 for a page, I'm going, I'd rather not pay that, or I couldn't afford to pay it that year. And I decided, okay, I'm just not going to do it this year. And then I was worried, well, I'm not going to get any work. Nobody's going to see this. I won't get any calls, whatever. And nothing really changed. And I'm going, that's interesting. And then the next year came around and I decided, well, let's see if it changes now. Nothing really changed. And the dynamic changed because that is when social media started coming heavy on the scene. And the reality is that the people that hire designers, that hire creatives like you, like me, like a lot of other independents, is that they're all looking at the same curated services that everybody else is. So as long as you're consistently sharing your work, and it doesn't have to be finished work, it could be, people love to see process. You might not get work immediately, but if you stay consistent with that, eventually something's going to come up in somebody's workflow. They go, oh, you know what? This would be perfect for so-and-so to handle, and they'll contact you. Doing work on your own and sharing that, regardless if it's client work or not. I mean, there's a couple projects I've worked on this year that came about just because they saw a promotional illustration I did for spring, and that led to something else. And I'm continuing to work with her in this case. And you just have to. It's, unfortunately, this might turn off some people, but it's like a never-ending hustle. And I'm always trying new things. One of the best marketing strategies I ever heard was a friend of mine who's an insurance agent here in town. And I noticed he has vehicles with these wraps on them he's done. I noticed he has a sponsorship banner at the minor league baseball team out in the outfield. He sponsors the local soccer team, this and that. And I'm going, okay, Ted, I got to ask you, what's your marketing strategy? Because he's all over the map. And he looks at me and he goes, I just assume nothing will work. Okay, explain that. And he goes, well, if I just tell myself nothing's going to work, then I try pretty much everything I can, and then I figure out what does work best. I'm going, okay. And social media is kind of that way. There's a lot of different platforms, a lot of different personalities relate to certain platforms differently. In my opinion, the one that's coming out on top almost all the time for me is LinkedIn, and their engagement. Unlike Facebook, I made the mistake one time of doing a boost just because I was curious. Never boost. As soon as you boost, you're telling Facebook, I'm willing to pay to put my content in front of people, and you'll never get the same reach again. They'll throttle you. That's what they did for me.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, but on LinkedIn, I forget how many followers. I don't have a ton. It's like, I don't know, maybe 9,000, something like that. But I'll post something, and like in the first, like on Facebook, I'll post the exact same content. It might reach 250 people, and I have like 15,000 followers. I post on LinkedIn, within 24 hours, I'll get like 2,100 people who've engaged in it. I'll go back a week later, and many times I've exceeded how many people follow me. And I go back and I look at older ones, and it's like in the 30,000 range now, and I still only have about 9,000 followers. It's like, I don't know what it is, but they don't throttle. There's still some throttling on every network, but theirs is the best. And the thing I like about LinkedIn as opposed to Facebook is I don't care if my mom likes my artwork. I kind of expect that. But on LinkedIn, I only connect with people in my industry. So like creative directors, art directors, and I kind of go dumpster diving at times if I see something out in the wild and I go, wow, that's kind of a cool campaign. I try to connect with those creative directors because if you just, and always do that on your phone, not on the website. And I asked an engineer at LinkedIn this. I go, I've noticed that on my phone, I can just search, see some creative director, and just click connect. And then it's up to them if they want to connect back. It's that easy. But if I go on a website and I click connect, it goes, how do you know this people? Did you work with them? Did you manage them? And they like ask all these stupid questions. And if you don't click the right things, you can't connect with them.
Wow,
And
interesting. I didn't know
yeah,
that.
yeah. And the LinkedIn engineer just looks at me, you notice that, huh? And he goes, yeah, we're a little slow on getting our desktop version up to the same level that our phone is. So I always connect on my phone. I'll check it on my desktop, but I always make connections on my phone because you don't have to go through this whole vetting thing that they try to put you through online. So, but it's just more quality connections, I think. My cousin's never going to hire me to brand for him, but a creative director for a company who does a lot of packaging might. So, and as long as they follow you back, connect with you, then whatever you post is going to show up in their feed. And that's all I want. I want more eyeballs looking at stuff because eventually somebody will see something. It'll relate to whether it's immediate or not. Who knows? But they tend to archive the things they like or bookmark them, and there is no simple answer to this. I just think it comes down to continuity and consistency.
Right. And would you say that for majority of your kind of projects or clients, LinkedIn has been a stronger kind of channel based on what you said?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I've gotten work through Twitter. Not off the top of my head, I can't think of anything from Facebook. I've gotten a lot of inquiries regarding work through Dribble, but and every time I've replied to them, it's never led anywhere. So, yeah,
Yeah,
most of it is, yeah.
that's very interesting because at our agency, like when I started back in 2012, 13, when I restarted my kind of avatar, agency avatar, over the years, I've actually found Facebook advertising to be, or even right now, we have a number of campaigns running on Facebook, and those are the conduit for our funnel and our kind of clients. But having said that, it's a beast that needs its own kind of machine. You need someone who knows Facebook algorithm, the advertising algorithm, and how to set up campaigns and ads. But you're right, simple boosting. If you don't know what you're doing, or if you don't have a strategy behind it, then yes, it's a money pit, just like AdWords was. A LinkedIn, yeah, I'm pretty. I'm hooked on LinkedIn, but because my strategy has never been to work with other art directors, or maybe that's a great idea for freelancers. I think that is a fantastic thing that you just suggested, where they showcase their skills, and with the hopes that art directors would notice them. And I think that's a great takeaway from this, from what you said.
Yeah, I see friends of mine like Justin Aarons. He runs an agency in Chicago, and I admire him because he's the type of person that can walk into a room, doesn't know anybody, And 5 minutes later, he's like, hugging him and talking and just carrying on this. I wish I had that type of ability. I'm the kind of, I don't know if you watch any of the 80s movies, like 16 Candles. I don't know if
Oh
you ever
yeah, yeah.
watched
No,
that.
I know. I have that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The geeks that went to the dance and they're standing against, that's me. It's like, so when I go into, I go into a room with people I don't know initially. That's the way I am. I'm just like observation mode. I have to push myself to, okay, this is stupid. You need to go meet some people. And I do that, but it doesn't come natural to me. Whereas Justin, like, I've spent time with him and I just see how he deals with like clients. He's talking to him on the phone. We were in his car one time driving to his house and he's talking on the phone and I'm listening to what he's saying. And then he gets off and I go, so what was that all about? And he goes, oh, I just finally closed the deal with them on like a retainer for like 200,000 or something. I'm going, okay, you're the
Oh,
man. I'm just
yeah, that is
like
awesome.
I'll take one of those in my career if I could land something like that. But yeah, so I think it comes down connections, meeting people that I like working with people that I know are smarter than me because I tend to learn more that way. So, but working with agencies, there's a lot of really cool information that I cherry pick the things I like, how they handle, how they pose questions and draw out information. So, yeah, a lot of different ways to do that, but there's a lot of areas that I need to improve on. I am not the type of person that likes cold calling type situations where I try to drum up work.
Yeah,
Um,
I hear you.
that that almost, I can count on one hand how many times that's actually worked for me, and maybe it's just because it doesn't fit my personality or whatever. But um, yeah, I wish there was an easier answer for this, but I
No.
struggle with it just as much as other people
Yeah,
do.
no,
So
no, it is the holy grail, I suppose. And it's getting it's going to get increasingly difficult, especially with AI coming in and AI doing a lot of design stuff. They're already, trying to plot out. And so designers, I think, need to really look at fresh and new ways of really being creative, being out there, exposing their skill set and, getting into the groove, I suppose.
you know, let me throw something by you. I've always thought there is a local designer here in town who ran an agency. He's still around, but at one point he had an account executive working for him who was on commission, and all his job is he understood what they could do, what their specialties were, and he would go out and basically do the legwork and talk to people and companies and knowing what their capabilities were and then sell their services, and whatever he landed he get 30% of. I'm still surprised there isn't like agents like that for our industry, like on a greater level, that say, hey, we like the work you're doing, we can find more work for you, but we take 30%. If that's okay, let's sign an agreement. It's like, I'd be willing to do that. It's like, but the only time I ever see that is if it's like an art rep for an illustrator. That's essentially what they do too. But I don't see that so much on the design side for, and I'm just surprised. I thought there would be more. I don't even know of anyone, let alone any official business that does that. But it seems to me that'd be a good niche for somebody who doesn't mind being a salesman of sorts.
Oh, that's actually a great idea, and I think we should explore that and see if we can do something with that. Because you're absolutely right. Such a thing would really,
I
really.
don't want. I don't want to do it.
No, I know. No, I get you, but I think that is something
Yeah.
we can explore and see how that goes. Vaughn, it's been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time this early. I know you probably had to crawl out of bed right there, but it's a very insightful conversation. What I'm trying to do with the Brand Builder Academy is really um, I feel that freelancers and well, there is a lot of education out there. There's a lot of videos and things like that. But this path from the horse's mouth, so to speak, I think is the missing thing, and that's why I started this with the vision that down the line it would be a university of sorts, and we create brand builders, so we help them certify as brand builders and so on. So it's a vision, but we'll see how that goes. It's a baby steps towards that, and so thank you so much for coming online and sharing your wisdom and your insights to this community. As soon as this is up and running, I'll send you a link to it. You are, I would suggest our community. I'm going to open this. I'm going to share this. Guys, follow Vaughn once at Twitter, and you're going to have a lot of fun. Vaughn is, I mean, the things that he shares and stuff, it's going to be fantastic. So it's Vonster. That's twitter.com/VONSTER. And of course, there's Glitschka Studios. And I mean, Vaughn is everywhere. So, but the Twitter is awesome. So yeah, that's it really. Thank you so much, Vaughn. And do you have any questions for me to end this?
Well, first off, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. What kind of chair are you sitting in?
Oh, this one is it's a GT Force. It's a gaming chair. It's got
Okay.
yeah. It's so well, I don't do that anymore. But I used to be a big. I mean, I used to play games. And when you said Assassin's Creed, that's one thing I used to play like crazy. Me and my daughter both. And this chair is fantastic for gaming. And now I use it for work and for interviews because of the lumbar support and all that. So I'll send you the link to it maybe in an email later on.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind checking that out. I have a Herman Miller, but I've been
How's that
having.
going? Herman Miller is supposed to
Oh,
be really good, ergonomic.
yeah, it is. It is really good. I actually broke it about 5 years ago, and I
Okay.
called them and they fixed it for free, so they're
Oh, okay.
really great. But
Ah,
yeah,
that's
cool. Well, thanks for having me. And if anybody has any questions based off the conversation we had, just shoot me an email or message me on Twitter.
fantastic, Vaughn. So good luck with your courses and stuff, and keep up the great work. I love your work. We all love your work. And it's people like you who inspire the community. It's people like you who inspire freelancers. So keep up the great work, Vaughn.
I appreciate it.
All
Thank you very
right.
much.
Talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Okay, take care. Bye.